Hi, I'm Paul.
And I'm Bucky. And today we're here to talk to you about adolescence in the brain. Um, and this is an important topic to understand from both an adolescent point of view and from an adult point of view, um, just so adolescents can have that understanding of what's happening to them and have a healthy perspective about what's going on. And then also as an adult, as we deal with adolescence, the better understanding we have of what's really going on, the better we're able to work with them and respond to them. Um, so we're going to just I'm going to do a little overview of adolescent development for you. So adolescence usually starts with puberty. Which is when your body changes from a child to adult. You become sexually mature, and um, so puberty is something that obviously starts different times for different people. Girls tend to start earlier than boys. Um, Girls usually start in an average around 11, boys usually a year later at 12. But there's no, I just want to say that this process is unique to each individual. And just because you start at, a different age, you may start earlier or later. It's not abnormal for that to happen. So it's not like all of a sudden on your 11th birthday that this is all going to start and go uh, chronologically the same for everybody. So things that happen to both males and females when they go through this process. You can get acne. You start to sweat. I always am. If you ever had the experience as an adult of driving 4 or 5 uh, for me, in my case, boys, after a practice, a middle school practice, you'll know what I mean by body odor and smelling bad. So that's why showering and using deodorant and stuff like that is stressed a lot at that age level. Um, we start to get hair uh, growing in our armpits areas, in our genitals. That's known as pubic hair. Um, and for males, your voice lowers. You get that crack sometimes in your voice, which uh, can be embarrassing at times. Your sexual organs mature. You may get facial hair, uh, and you will get probably facial hair. You got to start thinking about that. And so, and for females, your breasts develop and get bigger. Your hips usually get wider. You become a little bit more curvy. You start getting your period. Those are all things that happen. The other thing too is you definitely become more sexually aware. Having sexual thoughts and urges. You may be attracted to males, females, or both. And so this is all a part of that, and it's all normal. So um, so, anyways, moving on. Um, the other things that begin to start to happen are things that are less. I mean, a lot of those physical changes are things that we can observe. Your grandparents see you and they say, "Oh, you've grown so much in the last since the last time I've saw you." As growth spurts are definitely part of that, um, a part of that physical change. So, but things like your emotions become more intensified. You experience emotions a little bit more intensely. Uh, I know that sometimes I've talked to parents and like, oh well, my son never yelled at me like that before. He got really really upset with me, and um, and part of the reason that they got really really upset is because of the way they are experiencing those emotions. So there's definitely that emotional intensity that happens. Um, The other thing is you become more of a risk taker. You'll notice that teens tend to take risks. You notice this, especially if once you become a driver at 16 or 17, and you have to pay insurance. The insurance for 16 and 17-year-olds is very high because 16 and 17-year-olds tended to take risk more than us people my age. So risk taking is definitely a part of it. Also, your thinking is you're going from when you're pre-adolescence or early adolescence, you tend to be a concrete thinker, and you're not necessarily thinking futuristically or thinking about what's going to happen next month or whatever. You're pretty much focused on the day and the next day maybe. So you begin to develop what we call more abstract thinking, which is being able to think more critically about things, also being able to problem solve, and also being able to think futuristically. So that's sort of a process that's happening also during this time. Obviously, you're also during the adolescent time, adolescents are trying to become more independent from their parents, and their peers take on a very important role. So all of a sudden, peers become the focus of their attention and not necessarily the parents. So that's a transition that's also going on. And also, I think there's also this self-consciousness that goes on. Like you become very self-conscious of how maybe you look or dress, and how are you being accepted by your peers. And so the interesting thing is that you may feel like, as an adolescent, sometimes adolescents feel like, oh, I'm the only one who feels this way. But really, everybody else is going through the same thing and is having those same self-conscious feelings. So it's just something else about the process. And we've really learned a lot about adolescent development in the last 15, 20 years due to our understanding of how the adolescent brain works. And the brain is responsible for all of this stuff that's going on. And so we can actually take a look more closely at what happens in the brain of adolescents and how that plays a role in some of these changes that are going on. So I think Paul's going to talk a little bit about the brain and how it differs from an adolescent. An adolescent brain is different from an adult brain.
Yes. And I want to point out too that adolescents often get a bum rap. So when I know Bucky and I both have worked with adolescents for many years, and usually my friends or other adults will say, "Man, how do you do that? Like, I wouldn't want to work with adolescents." And I'm like, "No, they're actually great. They're really fun. They have lots of energy, and they're great people." So I really enjoy working with adolescents, even though their struggles are great and they need some support. A lot of that is around adults understanding what adolescents are going through and being as supportive as possible.
Can I just say something, Paul? I would agree. I think one of the great things about working with adolescents is their flexibility. They're not as entrenched in ways of thinking, which unfortunately some adults are become more entrenched in ways of thinking, and they're harder to it becomes harder to change. So I think that's one of the other things about adolescents that I love, is just that their ability to be flexible and to see things differently and understand other perspectives.
That's a great point, Bucky. Thank you. So a lot of the changes that Bucky talked about are things that are going on in the brain. And we know now that adolescents' brains are very different, just like children's brains are very different than adult brains. They used to believe that children were just little people, they just didn't have enough knowledge. But really, at each stage of life, your brain is different. And so when we're talking about adolescents, there's a really important part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. So what that is that really regulates your emotion, your impulse control, your ability to think about things in a critical way, and also your judgment and your reasoning. So it's a really, really important part of the brain. And sometimes adults will cock an eyebrow and be like, what's going on? When they see adolescents get super emotional about something and adults are like, what's going on? Because they can't necessarily remember when they were under the same problem. So really, your brain is developing from the age of, when you start adolescence, that is developing up until the age of 22 or 25. In fact, if we knew what we knew today, I think alcohol and things like that would not be legal until the age of 25 to make sure that your brain was fully developed. So it's important to know that your brain is geared so that you will seek attention. So actually, dopamine, the thing that kind of makes us feel happy, and adolescents have a little bit of less of that because the brain really wants you to go out and be a thrill seeker, because the brain really wants you and knows that you're going to become an adult and you're going to need to have a lot of experiences, and your brain needs a lot of different experiences to be able to develop. And so it's going to have you go out and seek all those things that that you need to help your brain develop. And that's why sometimes, and with the lack of critical thinking, sometimes that's why we see teenagers maybe doing some things that we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did that. And now we kind of know why that they're doing those sorts of things. So it's really important for us to help teens figure out how they can have some fun, risky experiences that aren't so risky that they're not going to survive their adolescence. It's really important that everyone survive their adolescence. The other part of that is the teen brain, which is another thing to really love about teens, is way more creative. Your brain is maybe at its creative peak when you were an adolescent. And so I hear a lot of adults say to teens, we're preparing you for your future. And I'm always excited when I hear about groups of teens that have gotten together and solved a big problem, or teen entrepreneurs who have just really gone out and been successful. And I really believe that we should be gearing teens to doing what they care about and what excites them today. And they'll definitely do more of that tomorrow if they're doing it today. So, teens are really set to do some great learning and be creative and have lots of amazing experiences. And the other thing is, a lot of people wonder, why is my teenager suddenly starting to sleep until noon? And half the day is over. But realistically, teens need more sleep. And, and if you've ever had a teen, that your food bill probably is going through the roof because they eat a lot. And they're growing, they're burning off a lot of energy, and they need a lot of food and a lot of sleep to make that happen. In some ways, a lot of people, like I think, it's a little crazy to have school start so early. I think if we knew and we were planning school now and we knew about adolescent development, we would probably let adolescents come into school later, like starting at 10 might be better, so they get a chance to sleep in and then be ready for their day. Sleep is critical to being an adolescent. And it's sad that a lot of adolescents don't get enough sleep because it's so important for that brain development. Because while you're sleeping, that's when your brain is repairing, it's building connections, it's building memories, and that is super important. And then the last thing I really want to talk about is drugs and alcohol. So we know that particularly marijuana and alcohol, when they're used regularly, can interfere with your brain development. Things like emotional regulation, critical thinking, and there are some side effects from marijuana and alcohol that can also do damage outside of that. But we know specifically that adults tend to take not have as much damage to their brain. And that's not to say that it's healthy for adults to consume large amounts of alcohol or marijuana. It's just that it's really critical that the teen brain be able to develop normally without the interruption of these substances. So you really need to think about that as you're making choices and it's okay to make a choice to protect your brain. And we also know that adolescents, the longer you wait to start drinking, and I get that this is society kind of normalizes that for youth, especially in college. But the longer you wait to use, the less likely you are to have an addictive problem with substances later on in life. And that can be a really difficult life circumstance that can be really hard to change. So the longer you wait, the better, and it's better for your brain. So that's all I'll say about that. And so, Bucky, do you want to talk a little bit about what challenges that
Sure.
adolescents face?
Sure. I mean, because of all these change that is happening in the brain, obviously it brings a lot of different issues that adolescents face. And so I'm just going to go over some of them. So one of them is obviously dating, maybe, and maybe more importantly, figuring out your sexual identity and what are you attracted to? What are you not attracted to? And there can be a lot of pressure put on adolescents around that. I think of the time-honored tradition of the prom, which is always sort of this big event that's held in high schools, and the whole ramifications of that around dating and being with somebody, and maybe you're not with anybody, or maybe you're more attracted to someone of the same sex, and what's that going to be like? And so I think it's just something for us to be aware of, especially adults, that kids are going through these pressures around dating. Especially if there's a culture in where they're in their school, perhaps, that dating looks a certain way. It's a male and a female, and this is the way it happens. And so sometimes that culture can actually become very toxic for some kids. So it's just something to think about in schools. Also, I witnessed this a lot, or I have witnessed this a lot as a school counselor, and that is pressure around the future. We're trying to figure out, adolescents are trying to figure out their identity. Where do they fit? How do they fit into the future? What will that look like? I think lots of times students get a safe feeling in high school, and they're going to be going out someplace that's unknown, and it's a very scary process for them. So pressure for what they want to do. I know lots of times students feel like they have pressure from parents as what they should do, and so they're trying to weigh that with what maybe they want to do, which may be different. And so that can be a real source of anxiety for students. So definitely the pressures of the future. The whole thing around driving, lots of driving can be a whole bring up anxiety for both parents and students. I've had students who are not interested in driving just because that the anxiety that it brings on of driving. And then I've had I've had parents who are like, hey, I got to get my kid needs a license because they need it for their job. And it's really an important part of how they're going to work during high school. And also, since I'm not home during the day, they're going to be able to pick up the other members of the family. And so driving can be a real source of anxiety and pressure. So that's another thing to be thinking about. Conflict with parents, that happens a lot for adolescents. And remembering, I think, as parents, remembering that our kids are experiencing their emotions much more intensely. And so therefore, they may say and do things that they don't really mean. And so it's just being able to put that in perspective and be able to sit down and talk to them after when they're in a more settled state and hopefully that communication is two-way communication, and involving those active listening skills that that we bring up in all of our videos. So, and then there's just the greater societal expectations of teens. I think a lot of body image and what you're supposed to look like, and that the anxiety that brings to teens and adolescents. You know, looking a certain way, acting a certain way. So those are real things that teens face that they might not talk to you about, but they definitely exist and are there. And so it's definitely something to check in with teens about, and you know, where are they feeling where do they feel those pressures from? And also just their adolescents are in between. They're not children anymore, so we can't treat them as children, but they're not adults. And so you can't really treat them as adults. So it is sort of a balancing act of, you know, where do, you know, giving them some space to experience independence in a safe way. I think Paul mentioned before a risk, you know, letting them experience a risk maybe that we know is safe, but it's a sort of risk to them, and giving them that opportunity to experience some of that independence, while also sort of making sure that they're not making decisions that are going to be things that could be, you know, could be fatal. So you definitely want to, you know, try to have that balance. Other ways we could support teens, Paul?
Yes. I think some of the best ways to support teens are using your active listening skills if you're a parent, and remaining open-minded. And the best thing that you can do is role model for teens some of the things that they struggle with. That, you know, and just because teens are working on it doesn't mean that as adults we have it down perfectly. Not all adults have the best critical thinking, and not all adults have the best emotional control or impulse control. So as parents, the best thing we can do is show them the best we can how we do those things. How do we control our emotions? Because really the brain, we know, is like a muscle. And the more you use it, the better it gets. So the more opportunities teens get to practice some of these skills, then the more they're going to get when they come out of it. So just like kids need to be exposed to a lot of things, teens need to be exposed to a lot of skills that they can use. And so we want to protect them, but we also want to give them lots of opportunity and some responsibility that they can figure out. And I, for one, am someone, and I don't want to speak for you, Bucky, but I believe you feel the same way, that teens are capable of a lot more than we give them credit for. And when you give them the opportunity, teens will really step up to the plate, and they can do a lot more. Here in Vermont, we've started a group of teens that have talked about and worked with the state to have a teen bill of rights, and to really help teens have a voice in things like their community and how they can be active and saying what they need, and talking about the things that we can do to better support them. And I think using teen voice is really important. And then as adults, really being patient to sit down and to listen. You know, teens want to hear what you have to say, and they want to understand why you make the decisions you do, but it's also really important for them to be heard. And adults tend to have different expectations. Bucky talked a little bit about some of those societal pressures around knowing what you want to do with your life. And the number one thing we know that teens care the most about is relationships. They care about their friends. They care about their, you know, their dating life and who they date. And those things mean a lot. And those are the things that they really care a lot about. And they're practicing a lot of skills. Unfortunately, you know, sorry, teens, but the person you're with right now may or may not, probably statistically not, be the person you're going to be with 10 years from now. So a lot of the relationships that you're engaging in now are really setting up relationships for your later in life. And that doesn't mean that they're not important and exciting you should be present with them and not think of them as the future, but right now. Always think of right now. But know that you're also building skills that you will use later in life.
Hey,
Um,
Paul,
yeah.
I just wanted to add something about, you talked about the importance of letting of student voice or teen voice. And I think one of the things that's happening in schools now is that adults in schools are really allowing teens to have more of a say of what's going on, and they're being heard. And so I think that that is really empowering for teens, not only how to express themselves, but how can they express themselves in appropriate ways to make change. And so that can be very powerful. And I think too that the ideas that they come up with are actually, they come up with some very good ideas. I know in the past, pretty much, students in schools, like, don't say anything, and the teachers and the administration will run the building. But more and more, I think the educators are understanding the importance of student voice in the education process. So sorry to interrupt you, Paul.
No, that was a great interruption, Bucky. Great idea. And I think I've been in a lot of meetings about teens that don't have teens in the meeting, and
Yeah.
or other ways to get teen input, and that always makes me laugh. We have a saying around here that we nothing about us without us, and I think that really is important with teens. The other thing I think we can do to be helpful with teens as adults is faith. So parents, I know, they have lots of expectations, and often parents are worried about things that they've messed up in their lives that their teens are going to do. So they're constantly like thinking about, oh, I don't want them to do this. And realistically, your values are have such an influence on youth. So when they're teenagers and they're trying on new identities, and your teen comes back and they've suddenly got blue hair and perhaps a tattoo that you didn't really know they were going to get, or they have a nose ring, or a tongue ring, and you're like, what is going on? Have a little faith that your teen is just figuring it out. They might change friends. Sometimes I want to hang out with the goth people. Sometimes I'm gonna, try my preppy look and hang out with the preppies or whatever. There's lots of groups, and teens will tend to try on a lot of different identities to figure out who the heck they are. And sometimes that's the only way we know, is to try different things out. So teens will do that. And I think support is super important. And I also want to say, like in Vermont, there are a lot of different, and in other parts of the country for sure, racism plays a large part. Like in Vermont, we have a very white population. And so teens who have dark skin tend to not have a lot of people in some of our rural schools that look like them. And that can be really difficult because they definitely face racism. So schools really need to work to support and support youth who are non-white to feel comfortable and to be able to develop in their own way. And kids who are lesbian, gay, transgender also need that support. Kids will, do a lot of exploration to figure out who the heck they are. And we try to give them good boundaries to figure that out, but we also got to give them a little freedom. And then if you're a teen, the way you can recognize it is that, hey, while we're all afraid that we're being compared to everyone, we're also very different. So some teens might do different things weird. They might have the mohawks, or, maybe they're thinking about what their gender identity is. Maybe they're, trying to figure out what faith looks like for them. These are all things that you should be supportive of your fellow peers around, and educate yourself about some of the struggles that other people might face that you're not facing. You don't have to understand what someone's going through to support them all the time. And this is what parents have to do. They have to, sometimes they shake their heads at their teens and they say, oh my gosh, what is going on? And they don't have to understand. They just have to support and have faith that their teen is going to figure it out and work it out for themselves. And they're a different person, so they're going to make different choices. And so it is important for teens to have boundaries, but I think avoid power struggles with your teen, and try to negotiate and to really help teens understand where you're coming from, because they'll appreciate that. the things teens want the most is respect. They want to know that you respect them and you care about them, even if that means sometimes as parents you have to put down rules, but at least you give them the understanding of why you're doing it and you hear their perspective, and that's really important. Um, and So I think other things that adolescents need to know is that take it easy on your parents. They're also doing the best you can. Sometimes they forget what it was like, um, and they don't always understand. So really have a little patience with your parent as they're trying to keep you safe and they don't know what they're doing. Maybe if your parents roll their eyes or maybe they yell at you, take a deep breath and try to explain to them what you're thinking, feeling, and what your ideas are, and try to compromise, just like we recommend for adults to do. You also try to compromise with your parent and help them understand your perspective and where you're coming from. Because for a lot of parents, they have this wonderful, lovely child, and then all of a sudden that child becomes an adolescent, and it's a little like holding a Wolverine in your lap. One minute you're petting them and they're really nice, and the next minute they're clawing your eyes out and you're trying to push them away. So that's because adolescents have a lot of energy and a lot of different thoughts and emotions, and that's pretty normal. So sometimes adults are standing back like, I don't know, do you either love me or you hate me? I don't know what's going on. So have some patience with your parents and try to be explain things to them. And just remember that everyone is different, and everyone's bodies go through change differently. And also teens, remember that our bodies, sometimes it's unfortunate, a lot of things come online, like our sexuality, when we don't necessarily, and society gives us a lot of choices when our judgment isn't the best. It's not at its best working ability. And so like things around sex that might have a lot of consequences for us, our body is telling us to go for it. But and the best thing we can do is to talk about those things with our parents or trusted adults to try to help you make decisions when your body is telling you one thing and you're not sure what the consequences might be. So just so you know what kinds of things are happening, because we all want you to survive adolescence as well as you can and free up your choices as an adult. And sometimes when we take certain risks, drinking and driving, or having sex with someone that's an unwanted pregnancy, or maybe it wasn't the experience we wanted, we carry those things and it limits our choices as an adult. So just being really careful, having great conversations with trusted adults, and you will survive. And adolescence is a great time of life, and we hope you also take some time to just enjoy being an adolescent, because there's also lots of fun.
Yeah, and just one more note I just want to say, I think we started in the beginning. We talked a little about just the importance of relationships during this process. Not only peer relations, but adult relations. And it doesn't necessarily, I know myself as a parent, I was always pleased if my student or my child had a relationship with another adult who wasn't me or my wife. So because those relationships are important, and another trusted adult is someone who can provide perspective, someone who an adolescent feels comfortable going to and talking to. So I just wanted to make sure that we sort of came back and rehashed that a little bit. So and remember too that the process is unique. It's unique for everybody. It's different for everybody. And so, I mean, there are some commonalities, but we just have to also just embrace everybody's uniqueness that they bring to this process. Yeah, that's about it. All I have for today. What about you, Paul? You have any more closing remarks or?
Nope, I think that's great. And I would also plug for therapy. I've worked as a therapist. I've worked with a lot of teens, and sometimes teens feel like they're forced to go to therapy, but I'd like them to think about therapy as having that trusted adult that you can kind of say anything to and get feedback and kind of help you make good decisions, and to listen. So don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist and find one you feel comfortable with, and to be able to help you through those conversations as well. Just because you're in therapy doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. We could all use therapy at times just to help us think about what's going on. And sometimes there are, we do have mental health issues that come in teens. A lot of teens suffer with anxiety and depression, and a lot of teens suffer with things like discrimination and homophobia, racism. And it's really important to reach out to those folks that are supported and to let them know what you're feeling and what's going on, and let them help support you in that. So, and therapists are a great part of that. So don't be afraid to use those books.
And as usual, if you have any comments or anything, or if you'd like to like us, feel free to do so. We would love hearing from you, and hope that you're having a good day.
Thanks.